In 1972, the country was divided, dazed, confused, and subdued. The reaction to the problem of war in Vietnam was achieved, and now the solutions would be formed. New domestic industries, markets, and subcultures had been birthed. America was now a beaten, rebellious, and reckless society, a modern Babylonian sex cult. And the film industry would, by design, reflect this. The 1972 films like Clockwork Orange and blaxploitation film Superfly would depict this climate of utter depravity perfectly. Speaking of blaxploitation, we encounter the other side of the demise of the civil rights movement. While feminism and gay rights pushed black liberation into the shadows, at the same time, blaxploitation aimed to detract the focus and shatter the reality of the black population as a whole. Hardly a year after the death of Panther Fred Hampton, the blaxploitation era began, officially ending any potential of development in the black community, done so by corrupting the culture, in turn possessing the spirit and re-engineering an entire people. This all began in 1971 and right out of the Black Panther Party. So let us rewind back to '66 to set up the development. As we discussed in part 2 of the series, Time Life magazine photographer and Office of War Information agent Gordon Parks was assigned the position of documentarian for the Black Panther Party in 1966 under the auspices of the Central Intelligence Agency. In fact, even prior, he had always made a career out of taking visceral and poignant imagery of the Black American experience, though his talents were used for espionage and the covert surveillance of the civil rights movement. A wolf in sheep's clothing, a hired mole, Parks would not only photograph the Black Panther Party, but he would also play as an intelligence agent for the US government, along with numerous other plants within the party like Columbia University man and Jewish leftist fundraiser David Horowitz, whom once the party was dismantled in '69, joined the CIA front publication Ramparts magazine as editor, and today is shockingly a right-wing conservative. Interesting. Horowitz was also an employee for the Peace Foundation of London under Fabian socialist and eugenicist Bertrand Russell. Another prominent agent was Panther member Elaine Brown, who would play as a honeypot and eventually introduce Huey P. Newton to heroin through a backdoor drug running racket developed through Horowitz, as well as documented FBI agent Richard Aoki of Berkeley University's Young Socialist Alliance. He joined the Black Panther Party in 1966. As a top-level informant, Aoki was commissioned to provide the party with an arsenal of weapons to radicalize the group. At this point, the party took on a much more aggressive and confrontational direction. Prior to Aoki's joining, the Panther Party was innocuous, yet still a communist justice league. They were simply starting school breakfast programs and holding peaceful meetings focused on community building and education. Gordon Parks played a key role in this secret intelligence orchestrated radicalization of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California. He single-handedly sensationalized the armed and dangerous reputation of the party by making their weapon-brandishing images famous. Parks would produce some of the most significant agitation propaganda of the era, all the while frightening society and demonizing the black people. While Richard Aoki stoked the ideological flame by inciting violence with endless supplies of intelligence-provided weapons and deep socialist and leftist rhetoric. This would go on until 1969, when the party was officially disbanded with the assassination and brutal murder of Fred Hampton by the FBI. The Panthers were finished, but Parks' career was only just beginning. During this time, he also worked as a consultant of Hollywood productions. This is what we would call today an intelligence liaison, like Chase Brandon, for example. Secret intelligence has always been directly connected to Hollywood, just as much as it is to the occult. They play as a subversive trinity that has had the ability to construct societies since its inception. So it only makes sense that Parks would develop his career further in Satan's theater. He continued his exploitation of black life by producing a successful series of documentaries based on ghetto life called The Learning Tree that same year of '69, becoming Hollywood's first major black director. By 1971, Parks had spawned the most vile and detrimental film genre to date, BLAXPLOITATION, with breakout film Shaft. While Parks became a legend and pioneer of a genre, with the help of Jewish writers and production studios and foundation funding, of course, he destroyed the prosperity of a culture by utilizing a powerful mind control medium like entertainment to redefine and re-engineer an entire population of people. BLAXPLOITATION would go on to attack modesty, righteousness, and all things pure and good within the nature of black behavior. Its modification would take a disturbing turn from 1971 forward. Interestingly, he was used by the same organizations that funded and directed the civil rights movement. Many Jewish organizations abandoned the civil rights movement once it ceased and went on to Hollywood to produce blaxploitation cinema, like Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School, an integral part of the Black Panther movement and communist-driven New Left agenda in general. Marcuse also would go on to play a big role in the development of certain types of film in Hollywood. Theodore Adorno as well. The Frankfurt School intellectuals went directly from the academic realm to the entertainment realm to help stir the pot. And well, the rest is history. Just turn on your TV today, look at any current series on the internet, Netflix, big budget cinema, any of it and all of it. We might say it was pretty bad then. Well, look how far it has come. Mind control programming and entertainment, soul-sucking garbage. Hollywood appears to be a CIA, Jesuit, Jewish alliance forged as an apparatus for social conditioning over a long-term trajectory, and granted, with many foreign silent investor partners included. This alliance indeed predates the film industry. It goes as far back as the Crusades. Guess who were the financial advisors for the knights in shining armor and red crosses? And we are aware of the coalition between the Crown and Vatican City. Though the CIA came out of the OSS, well, the OSS was a descendant of British intelligence, which goes directly back to the witch John Dee, the original 007. Further connecting intelligence, the occult, and stagecraft media entertainment. Back to Gordon Parks. By 1972, and in typical fraternal brotherhood fashion of the elite, nepotism kept the blaxploitation genre moving swiftly. A genre that I consider an intelligence-manufactured MK Ultra program, most likely cooked up in the Tavistock Institute. Gordon Parks Jr. would release the silver bullet film that defined the genre, Superfly.
This dude is bad, and he ain't just fly. He's super fly, yeah, super fly. When it comes to women, they come to him, but it's still not enough. He wants a big score, $1 million in cash, yeah, the big one. This is a chance, and I want to take it now, before I have to kill somebody, before somebody ices me. What kind of money are we talking about? That much. I quit a job and I took all this chance for nothing, and I go back to being nothing. Working some jive job for chump change day after day, because that's all I'm supposed to do. Then they gonna have to kill me, because that ain't enough. Ain't I clean, bad machine, super cool, super mean, super fly, here I stand, secret stash, every breath. I'm your pusher man. Can a super fly Harlem dude beat the system? He's got a plan. Just stick it to the man. He's super hood, super high, super dude, super fly.
It was released in 1972 and started the pimp and hoe, smoke and blow culture of the 70s. One that would continue for decades and is still very alive and well today. As Gordon Sr. passed the torch, his son would drive the dagger a bit deeper into the hearts of the culture with his smash hit and cult classic, Superfly, where drugs, violence, and lust became fashionable and endearing. And of course, striking a fierce dialectic politically in society by sexualizing and objectifying women on screen during the height of the women's liberation movement, which was also the same time as the height of the sexual revolution. 1972 strangely produced the strongest feminist movement and objectification of women media productions all in the same year. Another excellent example of agitation propaganda, and especially when you confirm that the CIA was, for one, behind the formation and guidance of the feminist movement, and two, behind the production studios that were releasing consecutive smut material, like the early adult film Deep Throat that took in 1 million at the box office that year. The book Joy of Sex was a bestseller, and Playboy was a lead publication nationwide. Interestingly, the feminist movement focused on support of lesbianism and denouncement of female sexualization. Yet it simultaneously promoted free love and irresponsible sexual relationships for women. Not to mention, blaxploitation films shamelessly promoted prostitution, rape scenes, and black women as harlots and swindlers. Yet the same year, the first black woman in history ran for president, Shirley Chisholm. If one wants to seriously screw up the mental state of a society, this is surely one way of doing it. Blaxploitation films would continue and increase in their depravity throughout the decade. Notorious films like The Mac would solidify pimp culture and drug dealing in the inner cities. Actress Pam Grier and her films like Coffee and Foxy Brown would indoctrinate women with a Jezebel spirit that is still extremely prevalent today and cannot be missed anywhere in Hollywood or the entertainment industry. To add to this, the blaxploitation film genre set the precedent for a very lucrative sex trade and prostitution industry. Though it always existed, blaxploitation films glamorized it, made it part of the culture, and the music industry would assist in this glamorization. To be accurate, Parks cannot actually take credit for creating the first blaxploitation film. In fact, it was first done by a lesser-known, independent producer named Melvin Van Peebles, with his sloppy and perverse film Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, which was no more than a sad excuse for a black liberation flick that relied on sex, vulgarity, and violence to retain viewership. Brazen and cheap, it opened with a graphic pedophile scene, as well as a typical black buck sex scene that foreshadowed the adult industry that was getting ready to take off in a few years. And again, the nepotism continued with his son's work, Mario Van Peebles, who would later continue the debasing legacy of Van Peebles Sr. by creating a new age blaxploitation era of his own with his cult classic film New Jack City in 1991. Which set the stage for many other hustler and thug films that complemented the gangster rap industry wave of Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. Coincidence? I think not. So blaxploitation has never ended and is as alive and well as it was in 1972. But in 72, things were just forming, and new waves of cultural influence were being created for very little money, but at the spiritual expense of millions. Blaxploitation became a cold-blooded social weapon, and as Curtis Mayfield quoted, a commercial for cocaine, settling the precedent for an up-and-coming adult film industry and lucrative drug market, especially the cocaine market, that would hit its peak in 1977 and wreak havoc into the 80s with crack. Blaxploitation films would take a historical seat in the archives of classic social engineering media, feeding into the debasement of culture and the proliferation of the prison industrial complex, once again by establishment intelligence and foundation-funded production studios. Blacks were used to not only destroy themselves, but to create demonic culture and assist in the demoralization of a nation. And the 70s is where it all took place.